quilting friends, it's Carolina Moore, your favorite sewing and quilting YouTuber, and today we're talking about pre-cuts. We're going to go over different kinds of pre-cuts, and then we're going to talk about how you can make your own pre-cut fabrics at home. You ready? Let's get started. So first, let's get our way a little bit around pre-cuts, why we use them, why we love them. Pre-cuts are awesome because you can get a sampling of a lot of different fabrics that coordinate together, that all go together. And sometimes finding the right fabrics for a project is really tricky. So when you know they already go together, it makes you feel more comfortable going into the project. Also, there are lots of pre-cut friendly patterns out there. Lots of pattern designers design using pre-cuts. So it makes it really easy with just a pre-cut and maybe some backing yardage or background yardage. You have everything you need for a quilt. So it's really easy and you get a lot of variety in your quilt because you have all those colors that go together. So the start of our pre-cut journey is going to be the half-yard bundle. This is a half-yard bundle of Art Gallery fabrics. I love that they coordinate, that they all go together. You can see similar bundles that are fat quarter bundles, and they're usually packaged really similarly to this as well. So half-yard and fat quarter bundles. The difference between a half-yard and a fat quarter is that a half-yard is going to be the full half-yard of fabric. So they've cut, a yard is 36 inches, so they've cut 18 inches from edge to edge, and you're going from selvage to selvage, which is going to give you 40 inches or more of fabric, selvage to selvage, and 18 inches cut to cut, right? So that is a half yard. A fat quarter is a half yard that's been cut across the fold, so it's going to be 18 inches wide and 20 inches or a little bit more, but 20 inches long. And that's what you can expect from a fat quarter. Now, I love half-yard bundles if I can get them, because I know that every single piece in the half-yard bundle is going to have a selvage edge on it. And the selvage is going to give me all the information I need to get more of this fabric if I fell in love with it or if I miscut and I need some more. This is what you love having, is the selvage. Also, I'm working on some selvage projects, and so I love keeping my selvages. If you get a fat quarter bundle, you might not have all the selvages, so hopefully you know what fabrics they are if you need to get some more. Moving on from our half yard and fat quarter cuts, the next size is 10-inch squares. So these squares are cut 10 inches by 10 inches. These are Art Gallery fabrics, and Art Gallery Fabrics calls their 10-inch squares Fabric Wonders. Different companies are going to call them different things, but they're all 10-inch squares. Art Gallery Fabrics has 42 pieces in a 10-inch square, and that's a pretty standard number to have in a stack of fabrics. You'll find that depending on the line that you're looking at, the number of times the same fabric is in here might vary a little bit. So some of the fabrics are in here more than once, and that can help with the pattern depending on the pattern that you're using. So these are Fabric Wonders, they're 10 inches. The next size down is 5-inch squares. Some brands also offer 5-inch squares. If you don't have or can't find 5-inch squares, you can always cut a 10-inch square into quarters, and then you have 4 sets of 5-inch squares. And if you have friends that all want to make the same quilt together and it only requires 1 stack of 5-inch squares, then with one 10-inch stacker, you can make 4. Also great if you're making grandkid quilts, you can make 4 of the same quilt for grandkids using one 10-inch square if you want to use 5 inches because the pattern requires 5-inch squares. Okay, so there are our 10-inch. Next in our pre-cut journey, we're going to talk about the 2.5-inch strip. And 2.5-inch strips are insanely popular. They're so much fun. This is actually one that I cut myself out of all different oranges. One day I plan to make an orange quilt, and I actually have 2 different sets of these 2.5-inch strip orange bundles, and they're just so fun. So you can cut your own sets of 2.5-inch strips. We're going to talk about some easy and fast ways to do that, and make your own 2.5-inch strip sets. I've had guilds that have actually said, okay, our color of the month is blue. Everyone bring in as many 2.5-inch strips you want of blue, and we'll swap them, and you'll go home with that many assorted blues. You can do that with a guild. You can do that with a group of friends. It's so fun to bring in 20 blue strips that you cut from your own yardage of fabric and go home with 20 completely different individual blues to make a scrappy looking quilt. 2.5-inch strips are also fairly affordable, and most rolls will have 42, but there are some brands that, depending on the number of, we call them SKUs, or the number of different designs or patterns within one fabric line, might have a little less than 42. So you always want to check the pattern that you're using and see how many strips it requires to see if one roll is going to be enough or if you need more than one roll to make your whole quilt. So those are the pre-cuts that you're going to encounter the most. Now you might encounter ones that are pre-packaged by the manufacturer of the fabric. They're pre-packaged that can often be shrink wrapped. That's nice because you know people haven't necessarily touched them or stained them, but you might find awesome bundles of 2.5-inch strips or other sizes that shops have curated from their fabrics. And that's always really fun to find shop curated strips or pre-cuts that are custom to their shop. So there are all different ways to find these, or if you can't find what you're looking for, you can always make them yourself, and that's what we're going to do now. So let's talk about cutting your own pre-cut fabrics. You can do this at home, and that's what we're going to do now. These are half-yard cuts that came from a half-yard bundle, but yardage, so like a yard, yard and a half, that's fine as well. And what I've done when I've pressed them, and this is something that I love to do, is instead of, and let's pull, I'm going to tuck these out of the way. Come here. There we go. So you can see this side here has the selvage, and if I flip it over, this is my edge. So I don't have my edge all the way, my two selvage edges together. I've brought this selvage edge up to the top of this printed selvage. And there are little dots here on the edge of the selvage that are used when feeding the fabric through. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut off both these selvages at the same time when I make a project. And so I like to have a little bit extra on this decorative selvage. It'll be cut like this. They're usually about 2 inches wide, and that makes for great selvage projects. And I'm just barely cutting off this little dotted edge because I don't want that in my quilt. And so that's what I cut off. But if you're making a pre-cut, what you want to do is you want to make sure that you have at least 20 inches on your fat quarter. So this is Arc Alloy Fabrics. They actually print theirs a little bit larger than 40 inches. So if I cut off my 2 inches here, you can see I'll still have nearly 21, almost exactly 21 inches of fabric. So this will be 18 by 21 even after I cut off this selvage bit and my 2-inch decorative piece of selvage. And so I really like that. And depending on if you are using these fat quarters, like if you're making fat quarter bundles to gift to friends, you'll want to leave those selvages on there. But if you're making yourself a fun bundle, you can go ahead and cut off that selvage. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Here we go. I'm going to go ahead and, there we are, cut off a pretty 2-inch piece. There we go. And now if I was going for fat quarters, I can go ahead and trim off right here, and I would have a fat quarter that I could use for a fat quarter project, and I will have kept my selvage for a selvage project. So there's a 2-for-1 win right there. But if we're going to go ahead and cut a 10-inch square, that's pretty simple. I'm going to measure 10 inches out. Now I like to do, okay, I'm on the 3 here. Adding 10 is really easy. 13. And I can't see enough of these lines to know that this is straight. And I'm not going to be comfortable with that. So I'm going to go ahead and turn my mat here and turn this. There we go. line this up here. I have this on the 2, so that means I'm going to cut on this blue, the 12. And there is zero shame in not doing the math in your head. We can go ahead and count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And I promise you, if you were in my sewing room with me late at night, I'll have done the math in my head and double check myself by counting with my fingers, because there's nothing worse than cutting your fabric too small, because then you've wasted it. All that's going to go into the scrap bin. And I make some fun scrap projects, but man, I don't want to make scraps on purpose. So there we go. I'm going to go ahead and cut a 10-inch square. So now I have this 10-inch strip, and I have cut it so that it's 18 inches wide. I could have cut it the other direction so that it was 40 inches if I wanted to cut 4 of them. I only wanted to cut 2 of them. I didn't want to cut that much off, but you can cut either way. You can cut a whole 40-inch, or you can cut an 18-inch, depending on how many 10-inch squares you want for your project. I just want 2 of this fabric, so I'm just going to turn my mat again so that nothing shifts. I'm going to cut this raw edge off because I want nice, clean edges. There we go. And this is the 4. I'm going to go to the 14. It's not late at night, so I don't need to count with my fingers. I'm okay there, but feel free to count with your fingers if you need. No one's hanging out in your sewing room with you judging. There we go. And then if you just want to double check, did I do it right? You can always fold on the diagonal here. And when these points line up, these points should have a crease right across. And that way you know that you're square on your 10-inch. So that's how you cut a 10-inch square. If you are making a pattern, you'll want to know how many of these 10-inch squares you need for your pattern. And let's say your pattern requires 42. You could go with 42 different fabrics. If you want 2 of each, then you only need 21 different fabrics. If you want 4 of each, you could do 10 fabrics with 4 of each, and then one of those fabrics, you have 6 of it. Or you could do 11 different fabrics. So you have some options and some choices there. I have a resource down below. Go find the link in the description, and I have a resource that will do a lot of this math for you to make it easier for you to figure out how many pieces do I really need to cut my own pre-cut, so that you don't have to write down the math that I just gave you, or try to do all the math in your head, either right there in the quilt shop or at home in the middle of the night when no one should be doing math. Okay. So we have our 10-inch square. 5-inch squares happen the exact same way, and I'm going to cut a 5-inch square out of this right here. So I've got my fabric. I'm cutting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Look at that. I did that with my fingers. Just counted along my squares. And I already know that this is 10 inches, so I just need to cut it in half. I'm going to rotate my mat here. Those of you who've been watching and have been saying that I need a rotating mat, I got one, but I haven't pulled it out for this. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, there we go. And because this is 10 inches wide, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I got 4 5-inch squares and 1 10-inch square plus a little bit of scrap. If I want, I could cut this down to partial 2.5-inch strip, but it wouldn't be the full width of fabric. Okay, so we have our 10-inch squares and our 5-inch squares. Let's talk about cutting our 2.5-inch strips. Okay, so I have another 1/2 yard cut of fabric here, and we're going to use this to cut 2.5-inch strips. The most important part of a 2.5-inch strip is that it is straight all the way across. It stays 2.5 inches at the beginning, the middle, the end. It's 2.5 inches all the way across. And the spot where you're most likely to not have it be 2.5 inches all the way across is at the fold of your fabric. So, because we know the fold is the trickiest, we're going to focus on the fold when we cut our fabric, and that way we won't have any problems. I'm going to line up my fold on my line. And I have this that I'm going to square up this edge. There we go. So I've lined up this fold on my mat. I'm going to take my ruler, line up my ruler with the lines on my mat. Now I haven't pulled out my spot on dots yet, but at this point I really want to, because I really want to be able to see those lines really well. There we go. So I've put my spot on dots on here. I'm lining everything up. And with one smooth cut, I'm cutting all the way down. If you can't do it with one smooth cut, get a fresh blade on your rotary cutter. So this is just my scrap. It's my squaring up. And now I'm going to cut 2.5 inches. I'm going to use my spot on dots, put them on those 2.5 inch marks. Line everything up. So I want to make sure it's 2.5 inches wide. I also want to make sure that this is square. It's square all the way across and all the way up. And there we go. We have a perfect 2.5 inch strip, and we can double check that middle where the fold is, and it's perfect, no V or notching. And that's exactly what we want. So we'll cut one more like this. Lining everything up. Making sure this fold line is square. The fold line is key. Lined up, lined up. And there we go, another perfect 2.5 inch strip. Now if you're going to be cutting a lot of 2.5 inch strips or 5 inch squares, I have a ruler that is going to be a total game changer for you, and that's the Stripology ruler. I have the Stripology Squared XL. I'm going to grab that out and show you how fast this goes with the Stripology Squared XL. So this is the Stripology XL. I have another video on it. You can go ahead and see that video here if you want more details on all the cool stuff that this ruler does, because it really does a lot. We're just going to talk about strips today. One of the cool things is you can see right here on the bottom, it has stars that mark the 1.5 inch. So if you're cutting 1.5 inch strips, and it has squares that mark the 2.5 inch. So you don't need to think 2.5, 5, 7.5. You just cut on the squares and you cut your 2.5 inch strips. Now the key to using this ruler, I'm going to go ahead and rotate my mat one more time. The key here is we want 2 parallel lines. So what I'm doing is I'm lining up this fold right here, and then down here you can see how this is crooked. I don't want that. I'm going to flip this over to make it easier. Alright, lining up this line, and then, because just like I said before, the fold is the most important part, and for the Stripology Squared, I have 2 folds, this top fold and then this bottom fold, so that it all fits under the ruler. So if this line is straight and this line is straight, both these folds straight and parallel, the magic of math means that any straight line we cut across here will be square here and square here. There'll be no notches or V's. So I'm going to go ahead and lay this down on my fabric. I want to make sure that this 0 is this side of all the selvage bits. I want to make sure that everything is lined up. There. And I have it lifted up for any parts that I'm moving. Line that up. And then the more you do this, the quicker you'll be at being able to just line everything up. But I have a dotted line here that I've lined up with this line. This is all lined up. This line is lined up with my fold or parallel, but it actually is lined up. This is lined up with a fold. If your folds are not lined up with a line, they should be parallel to a line. And now all I do is put just a couple fingers here on the edge and cut all the way across. And now I'm just cutting on the squares. There's a square. There's a square. There's a square. There's a square, and there's a square. So I can lift up my Stripology ruler, and magic, I have these 2.5 inch strips. And because I made sure to fold those lines parallel, no notch or V here, and no notch or V there. I know that was a lot of information, so make sure you go down to the description and get that resource that I've made for you on all different kinds of precuts, how they work, and how you can easily do the math to know what fabric you need to be able to cut your own precuts at home. I hope you enjoyed the techniques that I showed you for cutting your own precuts, and I would love to get your comments down below. Make sure you've subscribed to this channel so that you know about all the great videos that I have coming up, and make sure you've given this video a thumbs up to let people know that they should watch this video too. Interacting with this video lets YouTube know to show it to more people. So thanks so much for that. Friends, it's been awesome hanging with you. Let me know in the comments what you enjoyed and what you'd love to see next. And I will see you right here real soon. Bye for now, my friends.